The 1980s was an era rich with new advancements in technology. Arguably the most impactful, the new tech of the 80s carried with it the personal computer, as well as the rise of current-day tech giants like Microsoft and Apple. These companies shaped the digital world and helped lead to the proliferation and widespread adoption of computers and the Windows operating system into the houses of America. While the internet didn't come around for public use until the 90s, the 80s provided the framework for future global connectivity. The 80s also saw the introduction of personal music players, the most famous of which being the Sony Walkman, which put the individual in control of the music they bought and listened to. This spurred an increase in the variety of music being produced, such as the new genres of hip-hop and rap. Artists such as NWA, Run DMC, as well as those making music in the new pop style, a-ha, Madonna, and Michael Jackson, grew in popularity in these genres in the 1980s. Rock also got a major face change with the rise of hair metal, or hair bands like Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Kiss, and Van Halen, who revitalized popularity in both rock and metal.
The U.S. was led by President Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980. He was an actor before becoming a politician and proved to be an effective speaker and leader of the Republican Party. George H.W. Bush won the election in 1988 and served throughout the rest of the decade and into the 90s. The Soviet Union was led by Konstantin Chernenko until 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev took over. Gorbachev is known for his policies glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or reconstruction. Saddam Hussein was a brutal socialist ruler in Iraq during this decade. Reagan's policies of being tough on communism, combined with Gorbachev's reform policies, led to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. Reagan is known for supply-side economics, or Reaganomics, in which the government cut taxes and reduced government spending to increase production, jobs, and prosperity in the private sector. This helped pull the U.S. out of a recession. Reagan wished to restore the United States military might and compete with the Soviets. Billions were spent building up the military, including B-1 bombers, MX missiles, and the expansion of the Navy. Reagan also had a plan to create a laser-powered anti-missile system, referred to as Star Wars.
Reagan's buildup of the national defense budget led his critics to worry about renewed tensions with the USSR, especially with his new name for the Soviet Union, the Evil Empire. Included with his demonization of the Soviets, Reagan sought to bring an end to communist regimes in South America. This plan of his was successfully put into action by using the Marines to prevent the establishment of a pro-Cuban government in Grenada. However, a major blunder that came out of this policy was the effort to support a Nicaraguan Contra dictatorship in the face of a Marxist threat, despite legislation that banned the support.
As I said to you in March, I let my preoccupation with the hostages intrude into areas where it didn't belong. The image, the reality...
What made the scandal worse was the source of the funding. The U.S. had made dealings prior to sell heavy weapons to the Iranian government in exchange for U.S. hostages, but the money made from the transaction had been illegally redirected to funding the Contras, leading some to question Reagan's honesty. The 80s, sometimes referred to as the Me First decade, reflects its title in the fashion trends of the era. Everyone was focused on making themselves look as hip as possible by following the quickly changing latest trends. Madonna, arguably the most influential counterculture trendsetter for young women's fashion in the 80s, wore everything from crop tops and miniskirts to Marilyn Monroe-style evening gowns. Men's fashion in the 1980s was inspired by the world of music as well, with baggier jeans and parachute pants inspired by groups like Run DMC, and leather and denim jackets, as well as some skin-tight clothing from the hair bands. Finally, skin-tight sportswear also saw a spike in the 80s for both men and women, with the focus on making yourself look as fit as possible, fitting into the self-centered focus of the era. With the focus on individual expression in the 80s came a redefinition of gender roles. This change was especially reflected in the media of the era, with television shows and advertisements depicting a greater representation of women in the workforce and in executive roles. The fashion trends also reflected this shift, with worksuits being normalized for both genders, and workout clothing being popularized by a push from Jane Fonda to get exercising more socially accepted for women.
Now they're just jumping around. Unbelievable. The United States hockey team, average age 22. Herb Brooks, head coach.
In possibly the greatest upset in Olympic history, the U.S. hockey team beat the greatest hockey team at the time, the Soviet Union, 4-3 in the semifinal of the 1980 Winter Olympic Games. This U.S. team went on to win the gold medal that year. This miracle on ice influenced the party attitudes of the 80s. The 1984 Olympic Games was also very influential in American society. Hosted in Los Angeles, the U.S. won a staggering 174 medals after the Soviet Union and many other communist countries boycotted the Games. The Games ended with a profit of $250 million. This Olympics became a symbol for capitalism around the world, with McDonald's unpopular "When the U.S. wins, you win" campaign, along with other use of commercialism to turn a profit from hosting the Olympic Games.
Defeating the Soviet Union, the most improbable circumstance you could ever have imagined before these Olympics.
This is crack.
Crack cocaine was introduced in the mid-80s. It was cheap and extremely addictive. In the early 80s, drug use was not seen as a major concern. When asked, "What do you think the most important problem facing the country today is?" only 2% of people brought up drug use in 1985. When asked the same question in 1986, 64% of people answered that drug use was the most important problem facing the country. In the late 1986, Congress passed legislation that would spend nearly $2 billion on fighting against drug use. Time magazine summarized the 1980s with these words: "Get rich, borrow, spend, enjoy." The use of hands-off government approach by Reagan led to a mainly privatized market. Many people try to take advantage of this, using get-rich-quick schemes and try to manipulate the market in certain ways. Various Wall Street scandals also helped to create a sense of greed across American business. Greed also took place in common society, with companies now targeting the individual, so people wanted to have luxury items and show off their wealth. Commercialism appeared to make people less concerned with the well-being of others, but more concerned about the financial status of themselves.